Chapter 6. I stared right at him, Sam said, gripping the small mug of coffee tight as he neared the climax of his tale. And he just stared right back. Sean listened to his dad's voice crack a little with the excitement of the story. He had heard the story once before, but always kept it in reserve just in case there was the risk of a long lull in the conversation. After Sean sensed that things were going to quiet down a little, and that they were about to run out of things to talk about, he would ask his dad once again about the first buck he had ever shot. Sean pretty much knew the story by heart now. He knew that Sam would talk about how long he and the deer stared at each other because the deer had heard him pick up his shotgun. He knew that he would stretch that part of the story out to build the tension. That part always got longer and longer with each retelling. Sean was grateful for this because he knew that the story bought he and Sam at least another 15 minutes of conversation, which was 15 minutes less of awkward silence. I've told you this story before, though, haven't I? Sam would ask almost every time. Maybe, I think, Sean would answer usually. I can't remember. Then the story would always start. He could remember hearing it at family cookouts and holidays, even some weekends when Sean and Trey would come back home to just hang out. Sean thought that maybe his dad would catch on. He thought that maybe Sam would realize the reason Sean asked to hear the story so much, but Sam told it every time. Every single time. Maybe he just liked telling it, or maybe he told it for the same reason Sean wanted him to. Sean wouldn't dare ask that, though. The night was chilly, much more so than the night before. Of course, it could have been because Sean was wrapped in a sleeping bag tighter than a mummy the night before, and now he was just sitting by the dying light of a campfire, desperately pulling at his hoodie to keep his backside warm. He looked into the deep blue of the sky. Black clouds began to creep in from the horizon, blotting out certain sections of the stars like a pen that exploded in somebody's pocket. He wondered if it would snow that night. It would be absolutely the wrong season for it to happen, but Sean was so cold at that moment that he began to think of it as a completely realistic possibility. It didn't help his frigidness when the slow breeze would blow in from the open lake, barely causing a ripple against the surface of the water, but still able to freeze his bones solid. We just sat there, completely still, Sam said, holding his hands up now like a mime trying to show you an invisible wall. It was just nuts. I thought for sure he was going to just take off like a bat out of hell. But he stayed put, huh? Sean did not mean for that stutter to come out. The cold of the night was now affecting his speech as a shiver ran down his back. He was cold, but he didn't want Sam to know it. He didn't want him to think that he was uncomfortable while listening to the story, and was only listening to be nice. Yeah, Sam said, putting his hands down. You cold? No, I'm fine, Sean said, reaching down for a long stick to poke the embers of the fire with. Keep going. Yeah, so we just sat there looking at each other. Sam went on, repeating the same part of the story that Sean knew he would. That was another big difference between Sean and his brother. Sean would never want Sam to think he would rather be doing something else than listening to him. He would let Sam take as much time as he needed to tell whatever part of the story he wanted. After all, it wasn't a big deal to listen to the same sentence again. The story was his, and so he would just let him tell it. Trey, on the other hand, would interject with some sort of rude comment. He would do it with a smile, though, so that Sam wouldn't take too much offense to it. You just told us that part, Dad, Trey would probably say with a laugh, as if Sam didn't already know it. There would be a slightly condescending tone to the way Trey would make his remark, and Sean was sure that Sam didn't miss these comments, no matter how much he might have secretly wished Trey was there. The story was nearly finished when both of them suddenly fell silent at the same time. A sound from the distance interrupted Sam's story. It came as suddenly as a crack of lightning, and seemed to have the same lasting effect. It was a cry from the wild, a howling in the shadows. Sean's arms broke out in goose flesh suddenly, and he instinctively grabbed at them. Sam's head turned quickly as his sentence faded, his eyes fixed on the horizon. This sound was different from anything either of them had ever heard. Sean had heard coyote howls before, and he was sure that Sam had too. But this was something different, something wilder it seemed. In fact, the sound resembled no canine at all, which made it an even more difficult wailing for him and his dad to recognize. It seemed as though it was coming and going with the wind, and not coming from any living creature, even though it was, in fact, coming from something alive. It had to have been. The crying was too organic. It was too lifelike. In his sudden confusion, Sean was sure of two things. It wasn't the wind, and it wasn't any animal that he knew of. The wailing went on for a good 10 seconds at least, before the night fell silent once again. Sean and his father both stared into the darkness of the woods across the glistening water as it reflected the moonlight, and it seemed as though an eternity had passed before Sam broke the silence with the first uttered words. "What do you think that was?" "Coyote?" Sean asked, looking at his dad. He knew that he was wrong by saying coyote, but it was the only animal he could think of besides a wolf that might belt such a cry. "Yeah, maybe," Sam answered, still staring at the trees. "Could be a wolf, too." Sean would never forget the strangeness of that sound, even after the coming days when he would oftentimes forget how to count to 10 or other small, simple things. He would always remember the horrible wailing coming from deep in the woods that night that seemed to silence everything else around them. Even the toads had gone quiet after they had once again crawled to the shore for a feast of mosquitoes and moths.